Hello and welcome back or to my channel and a bit of a different adventure from the usual. Over the last several months, I've switched from building a full-time career in retail to returning to school. I ended up enrolling in a condensed administrative assistant program at Willis College, which so far I've really been happy with my decision to do so. Recently, we've started in on topics of digital marketing and web design, which are two things I have both dabbled in and have learned more about and come to find I really enjoy. Currently, we've been working on a bigger project involving creating our own fake brand, which we'd first make a style guide for and then would roll into creating a website for. So what is the brand I have since created, poured my soul into, and have now brought somewhat to life that completely doesn't exist? A cat cafe. And nobody who knows me well is at all surprised. This, to some degree, involved occasional group effort from my family and friends, pitching in ideas that I decided to also have just keep as an ongoing theme throughout the whole project. I wanted a cat cafe that served both tea and coffee with a fun name, so my dad whipped out the dad joke handbook after I spewed this all at him right before bed so he could stumble back downstairs with his brilliance. It was decided that the cafe would be called Kitty Bean, combining, of course, kitty, tea, and, coffee bean, with the two T's being in there, not one, since that was, in fact, a discussion point. Following my dad's input, he finally got to rest and my mom became the new target of my brainstorming. Together, we pieced together the values. We focused in on health in both body and mind. We plotted to make the connection between certain teas having various health or otherwise relief agents a part of their appeal to people's bodily health and picking sort of healthier drink choices. Beyond that, we compared the cats we'd have at the cafe as temporary companions, as well as following the idea of a support animal. And we expanded from support cats to an entire inclusive environment to take in mental health along with including diversity in general. I know, big dreams for a total fantasy, but we're both writers at heart, so nothing could be storyboarded halfway. We needed to believe, and in doing so, it did make me really familiar with what I wanted to market my vision as. Later on, my childhood best friend stopped by, and since she often feels just as much a part of the family, and usually the next in line to be subjected to my latest project ideas, I explained the entire concept to her, and naturally she jumped right on board. I set her up with some pencils and papers while I studied, kind of like a kid at daycare, and she brainstormed an idea for the logo, which she sketched out and explained. I had liked her idea, it had fit a bit of what I was kind of thinking as well, so taking the concept, I set to work creating it digitally. Originally, Canva was suggested to be used, and before we'd even started class, I had not only used Canva before, but for a logo for the channel. That being said, I actually ended up using Pixlr, which is sort of a free or cheaper version of the basic premise of Photoshop. So through the logo, as well as sort of our study of marketing, I brought together my love of cats with a funny name, a logo that I now had built and created, along with some color swatches, and boom, the fantasy became, well, a fantasy but with visuals. Now I needed to build the brand style guide. So what makes a good brand and what is a brand style guide? Well, first, what is a brand? A brand is mentioned in our study material as the personality of a product, service, or company as perceived by the audience. It's the values, personality, perception, experience, and the truth. So a good brand is something people will remember. It's up to date, it's clear on what the company's identity is and their values and what it's delivering to its customers. Meanwhile, the brand style guide is used to keep the company and its brand or identity consistent in all things from signage to websites or documents. All aspects such as the logos, the colors, the fonts, and so on remain the same. So in comes my guide. So originally I pulled a whole guide together on Word, and after finishing it, I found that while I'd keep some of the elements and wording, I was ultimately going to scrap the whole thing and start over. Something about it just didn't hit right. It didn't feel as like, I don't know, adult and clean. It felt more like just kind of pieced together, and it missed just some of the consistency for me, and it just didn't hit home the way I really felt that I needed it to. In comes Canva, where I designed the entire pages and basically the spaces on the pages and all just like the design and flat features that I would be placing my text and different elements on. After this, I would finish designing the pages, download them, and I would place them right into Word to then paste my text boxes and other elements on top of. Did this require having to go back and change things, move them around, change sizes because I couldn't change them in the document, and a ton more effort? Sure, but the lost sleep was worth it. When it finally reproduced something I could completely get behind and felt so much better turning in and was more proud of. So eventually I had my guide, which included what I had figured out before, along with like my colors, which now appeared as swatches in the shapes of teacups to match the sort of, well, brand and that character of a cafe and tea. And I had my fonts decided, which followed kind of like flowy but legible for the like bigger titles, and then came to a sort of still soft but more almost like standard font for the more wordy sections. These would vary a bit later as I worked on various platforms and I couldn't retain the exact same fonts throughout, but for this project, as long as the general sort of identity of that was there, it wasn't really a big deal. So now it was on to the next stage, which was going to be making the website. So I knew what I needed as far as like mandatory was going to be, I needed a home page, an about page, a services / like projects page, and a contacts page. Since I have a cat cafe, I wanted a menu, so that would become my like services / products page, which would have coffee and tea. So keeping up with the sort of like group effort I had going, I had my friends all pick either their existing cat, and then I would work with that and that name, or make up a cat, and then I would have them give me the personality of their cat, the name of the cat, and then they would come up with a drink for said cat, and they would like give me the breed they wanted and like things like that. And then I was going to put them all together and make drinks based off of their cats for the menu. So this project came with other like additional assignments attached to it, which would help us build the sort of roadmap for our website. One of them was all the writing that was going to be needed for the website, and then that would be reviewed and graded and things. And the other one was going to be for some of the photos that we were going to use. So eventually by the end of it, once we did sort of all the building around it, which is what I kind of continued with some of my smaller edits and art as well, you would mostly just have the concept of having to copy and paste everything into your website. And I ended up being kind of okay with this because, one, ADHD, I am absolutely down to ping pong all over the place and do different things. And two, it does help a lot more to kind of have all the pieces for the kind of like small pictures to put all together into the big picture. Because when I came to building a website, I realized trying to pick out a template can be difficult, and I really wanted to have a really good understanding of everything that was going to be included and how everything was going to look and the identity and vibe of everything. And I thought that would really help me build my website in the end. So it had been decided that for our websites we would be using Wix, which again is a program I have used before, or platform that I've used before, actually back in high school, so I was somewhat familiar with it. I've used it on and off for school and for my own personal projects, and I was excited to get a chance to use it again and have kind of a guided reason to use it again. But originally I had found one template, and I did really like that it was, positive color, but it was simple, it was quirky but straightforward. And I'd originally planned to work on that, and I'd even put some work into it. But again, it wasn't exactly hitting home for everything, so I ended up scrapping all of that and starting again and trying different things. But it did give me some ideas of some kind of like the vibe and those like pops of color and the kind of simplicity that I ended up carrying a little bit going forward. So I did take a break from deciding on sort of the template and web page to come up with some more details for the smaller editing, including like the pictures that would be needed in the assignment that mentioned them. And because I thought, again, figuring out some of those smaller elements would help me with deciding on the website. And one of the bigger ones would be like what was going to go on the homepage, what was going to be the main picture. So that main picture for the homepage, I got my mom to pose for me with our cat, Aki, and then I set it up so that it would just look like a plain wood table with coffee mug that I was going to end up keeping consistently throughout the menu, which you'll kind of see later. And then I was going to cut them out of the background so that it would make it appear more as if they were in a cafe. And so I used as well the title cut out from my original chosen font, just so I could keep that a little bit consistent on the website, even though I wouldn't be able to use that font more going forward. And I wanted to have like a callback to it. And I also used the colors, so I borrowed my teacups again, and I sort of borrowed the colors that I had originally chosen from those little swatches, and I decided on a new background and outline. I end up changing this a bit later, but for now this was kind of the original idea, and some of it did remain pretty consistent later on, which helped me decide on what the main page was going to look like. Then it was on to what became one of the main attractions to my editing and side art and whatnot, which was creating the cartoon versions of my friends' cats. Once the cats were done, I then moved on to the people who would be included on the site. For those who really had the cat in question, such as my friend Sarah and myself, I had us both take pictures with our cats to use on the website. The only exception being my friend Tay, who had a made-up cat rather than a real one, but was willing to let me use her image for the site, and it gave me a chance to include one with a cartoon cat. I really wanted most, if not all, of the photos on the website to be my own work if I could help it. Hence, creating the cats and doing the other images included myself. So Tay's part I actually ended up including at the end of the process. I wasn't aware originally I was going to throw her in there. We just were able to have a call today, talking about something else, and I was like needing an extra person, so it was cool that I was able to toss her in there and have that sort of connection between realism and the cartoon cat. So that is why there is kind of, it looks like a clip of her being tossed into the middle of a nearly completed website, whereas I haven't even shown that yet. A bit of inconsistency due to that, but I'm really glad she was able to come in clutch near the end and it really kind of pulled everything together, and it was great to have more of like not just my own content but also diversity between friends and other people involved, rather than just kind of including myself and things like that to try and fill some of those spaces. I ended up taking another editing break to work on another assignment attached to this project, and another step in making this fantasy brand even more present online anyway. We needed to either walk through the steps of creating 2 social media accounts for the brand or actually make them. And since I'm an all-in kind of nuisance, I decided to make the actual accounts, and I had wanted to deck them out a little bit and have them linked to the site. I started with Instagram, who let me go through the entire process before leaving me on red for a hot second and then promptly rejecting me as sketchy. It was unfortunate, I was disappointed, but I had to soldier on. Afterward, I went ahead to create a Facebook page, which lo and behold came through for me. I was nearly lost in my excitement until I realized I needed a banner and not just my logo, and so the domino effect was created, and I returned to Canva for a new editing side quest. And then after some commitment issues, much hassle, and finally deciding what I was and wasn't going to include and what would be a good offset and so on and so forth for this fake Facebook page for a fantasy brand, I finally finished it out and decided all my stuff and finished my banner. There were still some things that I was maybe a little off about and the way that it kind of fit, but eventually I did decide I need to move on to other stuff. I still found it was on brand, it was cute, but it was still pretty mature and clean, and I was pretty happy with it in the end, so that was that for my Facebook page. Finally, it was on to part 1 of putting the website together. So after going back and forth on templates, attempting at least 3, and pleading with myself to figure out what I was looking for, I gave up on templates and decided to build the whole thing from scratch. So with my teacher's words of keeping things simple and not overworking ourselves echoing in my mind not for the first time on this journey, I continued with my overcomplicated ways. I put together the basic outline and idea of what I needed and where things would go to help me finish out the smaller edits. And then for my mandatory pages, I needed to complete the other assignments with the words, which would be copied over along with the photos that I had, of course, decided in the additional assignment, which were all going to be included at the end. So that did, again, help with continuing the roadmap and just copying and pasting everything onto the site. And then showing me kind of like, here's the bare bones of what absolutely needs to be there, here's what's mandatory, here's my guideline, and then I'm going to go back to do my small edits and decide where am I filling the blanks, where do I need to have some more visuals and break things up. And it did help me end up building this template with having more freedom of what do I need, where do I want it, and going page by page myself instead of trying to keep myself to another template and maybe losing some of my sort of like creativity by just getting really caught up in another person's design. So I was really happy in the end with how I started putting all of this together and changing everything as I went and moving on to finish out my smaller details, which made more sense specifically to just my own ideas. I had tested out making the drinks and cat with my friend Jay's cat, Artemis, first. I did this earlier on in the process while ping-ponging from one thing to another, but decided the clip of it made more sense like amongst its brethren later in the video. That said, he was a pioneer for coming up with the idea of like the cat and symbol placement with the mug, and when I first tried overlapping images to try to stencil in more detail on the top of the drinks, was a journey in itself, but I was really happy with how some of them ended up coming out. And as you'll notice, the others, they have their own unique changes, but the overall concept and placements remain the same for some consistency. That being said though, there is no art without struggle, and I did end up noticing a mistake later, so I would end up making changes to him. So the mistake thankfully was fairly simple to fix. It wasn't that big, but I did notice she mentioned his eyes were supposed to be green, not brown, and I did originally make them brown. I didn't clue this in with the mint. I thought it was just her choice, and then when I looked at it, I was like, oh, that makes sense. It was also when I decided I was going to end up having the names be either brown for coffee or green for tea, and then it would kind of mirror on the sides of the site where I'd also added the titles like tea and coffee and made them fun and whatnot. So again, that kind of came in with that consistency and figuring that bit out. So all of that kind of started with figuring this guy out, and then I was able to move on with everything else. So once I finished fixing the mistake on both versions of Artemis, and I will say in my defense, in the picture she sent, the eyes look brown, but I did fix them. So once I had done that, I then started to put them in with the site, and that was when I also came up with the interactive little like boxes that I found, which you can hover over and it'll switch between, and I thought it was neat to have, you know, the cat with the cup and then the drink description, and you would hover over it and it would show just the cat and their personality and breed description. But eventually, again, no art without struggle. And I ended up finding out that this hover originally was not working the way I needed to. Like if you went to the hover, if you deleted the text, it would delete on both sides basically. So I need to figure out how to fix that so that I could have two different texts on either box that appeared, depending whether it was hovered or not. Thankfully, I did manage to figure out that the hover can have different text from the regular. If you remove what's in the hover section, it won't disappear from the regular section. It just wasn't letting me add new stuff. But if you go to the very obvious bar on the side that pops up when you remove stuff and says add to hover, it will allow you to add to it as well as hide different elements and things like that. So I was able to actually add new stuff as long as I use the actual add to hover, which is that plus sign on the side, while in that like hover mode basically. Once I figured that out and realized that my dreams weren't in fact crushed, I was able to continue to use these guys and go on to do the rest of the cats. So I decided now I know exactly what I want to do. Now I'm going to edit the rest of the cats. I know that this works, and I'm going to use this interactive box going forward. Once I'd resolved my issue, I copy and pasted the drink descriptions and cat information into the interactive box and then moved on to completing my other drinks. First, I started with compiling all my images I might want to borrow for this for inspiration, or either for the symbols like Artemis's mint leaves, or designs to stencil and collect all the links to them. Because I wanted to have just like everything together so I could just settle into editing, and then once everything was done, I could just copy and paste everything into my website like I had done for the big mass wording for the mandatory pages. So on to the other drinks I went. This was both a trying time, but also so much fun, and I ended up trying new things and being surprised by how much I liked the way some of it turned out. So I was really happy with this, and I'm glad that I went about it the way that I did. And I would totally enjoy doing more of it in the future. And then, brilliance struck: cat cam. Unfortunately, I had not thought to do it during the first go around with Noah, but I did just in time for Aki's drink so she could star right alongside her art and accompany the rest. And who doesn't love a little extra cat in their lives, especially in creation of a cat cafe? So whether you find the sped up editing satisfying, the cat herself, or both, like myself, feel free to enjoy some art and some cats before moving on to the grand finale. And so there I had it. All of my finished cats and drinks all ready, all set together. I can show them through now, and then I would be able to put them through onto my site. And what a little journey in themselves they were. And quite frankly, I ended up adoring absolutely every single one of them. I did notice while looking at Maple though, I had a problem child on my hands and he had a little spot and I just couldn't let it go, so I did have to go back and erase that. But other than that, once that was done, they were actually done. And then came the final stage. I put all the cats, their drinks and descriptions in the interactive boxes and finished off the menu, which pretty much completed our site, and even Misaki managed to see it through to the end with us. And so finally I had my site up. Kitty Bean had become a reality inside of a wonderful little fantasy. I was able to finish adding all my photos, getting all my words in there. I made sure my colors matched up with what I originally planned. I made my last minute changes. The social media on the bottom connected to my Facebook page, and our other option was to connect a account that was similar to our own if we couldn't have our own, so I did that for the Instagram. You can see my menu is all fleshed out now with like the different cats and their drinks, which was so exciting. I know it may have been the least necessary, but it felt the most necessary when I was being into my creative side and art and all that kind of stuff, and I'm really glad that it's there as a kind of like keepsake and a connection to all these people that I care about and all their bits and pieces that they kind of put into this as well. As you can see pop up a few times, I do have like social links at the bottom because it was necessary, which, you know, I wanted to have the Facebook page linked anyway, but as for the Instagram, that didn't work. It was suggested that we include just like a link to a similar brand, so that was what I did. So the contact page was kind of fun because I did add at the bottom, as you were supposed to be able to adopt some of the rescue cats, I did make the drop down menu actually usable. And I put in the fake cats, mostly because I felt like the real cats who were owned by people I didn't want to include as adoptable, even though it didn't really matter. Just the principle of the thing, but it did mean that we had some fake cats, so I could make them as if they were adoptable and available, which was great, and made everything more interactive. And I put hours on there, I changed our map, the whole 9 yards, and I'm really just so happy with the way it turned out. So finally, all that was left at the end of the day was to publish. And that was that. That was kind of the conclusion of this whole little journey that we went on. And thank you so much if you followed along with me. I really actually enjoyed it. I learned a lot. It was really fun getting to exercise some of the skills I already had, as well as learning more and building on those skills, and even kind of going through the process of teaching myself even more about Canva through even just making this video and using Canva really heavily for putting towards putting all kind of like the visuals together. So really wonderful experience, and I am so happy with how everything turned out. I had set in my mind that I would be using it as an example of my work, so I tried to set my standards higher with the knowledge I had. Where I got stuck, I wanted to learn to find resolve. I wanted to feel comfortable using this whole project as an example of what I was capable of, but I also ended up making this beautiful little time capsule of learning, solving, and art, but also of my family and friends and the cats dear to our hearts that led us here. So whether they may be reality or fiction, they made up a pretty good hike
through Fantasyland.